I'm Glenn McGuinness. This week on Outburst, the cost of carbon.
It'd probably hurt industry, I think, in the long run, but I think it's necessary.
The province would work together to find a solution to protect the climate change.
The provincial governments should be responsible for meeting the guidelines and kind of having a little of their own independence and say, because they have different economies, they have different industries, but definitely it should be Canada that's trying to set the goals for climate change.
I would say I'm swayed towards the position of Premier Ford.
A tax that does nothing for the environment, that's a job-killing, family-hurting tax.
Carbon pricing in Canada is complicated, controversial, and some say critical to fighting climate change.
Like you can clearly see, I do not understand like the people that say that it's not something real or anything. That's because we really can see, like back home where I come from, like in North Africa, like till now it's still summer there, and it was not like that like 10 or 7 years ago. So that's kind of weird, yeah. Like I'm from Egypt, so it's still like 22 degrees there.
Summer in Korea got super like hot and humid, which it wasn't used to be, and then it used to have like 4 seasons. Now people are saying like spring and fall is like way too short. It's hard to call it a season now.
Well, I think it's one of the most important things there is, because if we destroy the earth and the climate gets so bad we can't live, what's the use of all the other things we're doing? I was just talking to a farmer friend now. Frost in September, unknown before, and he lost 30%. That was more than his profit, so he's going in the hole this year.
I'm actually from Alberta, so I don't really see a lot of that in the town that I'm from. But then the first thing that when I came onto the island I saw is there's so much farming, but that's impacted a lot when there isn't enough rain, and just the soil isn't good enough to be able to farm.
I don't think we'll see much affect ourselves in our generation, but maybe our kids or our kids will. But I'm quite worried about it. We've really destroyed this earth. Not done much to kind of take it back, but too little too late, I think, for us.
It's probably the most important thing, because it'll affect populations and where they'll be able to live, and if we don't fix it, they'll probably want to be living in the few remaining places that they can. So all of the things that we see going on throughout the world with displaced populations, it's going to be multiplied by factors of 10. What we see moving now because of violence and war, we're going to be seeing multiplied again because of the changing climate and the absence of food. What's happening in Yemen and the Middle East, it's a famine that's brought on by climate change and political strife. So that'll just go everywhere.
I mean, obviously, like regulations and like holding kind of corporations accountable, and I think like investing back into kind of community programs that do like stream enhancement and different things like that. I have some friends who worked in that when they were younger, and I think they're a good step as well, just on the community level.
It is affecting all of us, so I think we all have to care about it.
There's an environmental crisis going on. There's got to be something done to change the economy away from a carbon-based economy.
Will pricing carbon be effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
As far as the carbon tax is concerned, I don't quite draw the line between where they tax people and that it's necessarily going to end up in a reduction in carbon footprint.
You're never going to change demand by taxing supply. You're gonna change demand by taxing demand. So if you want somebody to be more fuel efficient and use green energy initiatives, tax the consumer. If somebody's paying $2 a liter, they're going to drive a different vehicle. But if you tax the oil companies or the energy companies who are providing the infrastructure and hiring employees and expanding the economy, it's just proven it's going to have a detriment to the economy.
I understand the economics of it and why we're doing it. And I don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but in 2018 there was a study done and won a Nobel Prize on carbon tax. And it shows that it does work economically and for the future as well to reduce emissions.
Yes, I truly believe it will, and I support that being implemented by this federal government, and I wish all the provinces would support that fact as well. I think there's great opportunities that will come out of focusing on the environment in terms of jobs, plus the benefits for the overall environment, and Canada should be a leader on this.
I believe in renewable energy and everything like that, so I don't see it as a bad thing. I think it's more of an incentive to use renewable energy.
Whether it achieves an overall reduction in the carbon that is emitted, I don't know. That would be nice to think so, and I would think that major polluters should be taxed higher.
It's a start, and as a person who uses carbon in cars and home and that sort of thing, I'm more than prepared to make my contribution.
As far as paying me to upgrade my home to make it better, what it costs for me to make my home better is about $35,000, $45,000. So I don't think a carbon tax is going to pay me $45,000 to upgrade my home. So,
not at all.
Why?
Because that's what we live off of, and carbon tax isn't going to reduce anything because you'd have to shut everything down.
If there's no price on carbon, if it's free to emit, there's a very limited business case for any company to spend the money to solve the problem, because the problem's not costing them any money right now. Society's paying the price. Hi, my name is Sandra Odendahl. I'm the President and CEO of CMC Research Institutes. CMC Research Institutes is it's a small technology and innovation company that helps support companies to pilot and scale up their carbon reducing technologies. Carbon pricing absolutely helps major industries create the pull for those small companies to know that somebody is willing to pay eventually for the technology that that innovative academic person or that innovative startup is coming up with. We're on track for catastrophic climate change in the next 50 to 100 years. All of the scenarios say that we're going to need a certain amount of carbon capture and storage. Capturing CO2 from, say, from the smokestack or from flue gas, concentrating it, so that's called carbon capture, and then using it in products like concrete. Using it in, there's some companies that are using it to actually grow large amounts of biomass, so algae, and then, and then use the algae as a biofuel. So when you look at the life cycle of emissions, overall, you're actually reducing the CO2 and you're still having a source of energy that essentially would displace using fossil fuels. In Alberta, we have a 200-hectare field research site. So it's a big area in the prairie where we have the ability to inject carbon dioxide deep into the geological formations. The carbon price helps drive innovation, but the most important thing is stability and predictability of climate change policy. So that is really, really important. Fossil fuel use isn't going anywhere. The climate, our planet's survival is at risk. And so we need to be really innovative, and we need to break down silos across finance, across science and engineering, and the creative, the creative minds in all sorts of different disciplines really need to put their minds to this. So I feel privileged that I can work in this space. It feels like it moves way too slowly for any of us who've been doing environmental work for a while. It's never going to move fast enough for us. But I feel really passionate about this mission, and I feel privileged that I can actually have a career and get paid to do something that, at least for me, is meaningful and that I actually feel proud to tell my kids about.
What does a carbon tax mean in your community?
Just another tax.
Why do you say that?
Stephen Harper says that he thinks it's just another tax, and I trust what he says.
I think it just means that we're paying more money without really making effective change to the way we do things. There are other mechanisms I think governments can use to affect change through regulation, for example. So I know it may not be for the province or for the feds, it's hard to tell who's who, but let's say we change building codes. In order to get back, I think what we're hearing is carbon tax we get back around $300 something per family for. If I want to upgrade the insulation and windows in my house, it's going to take me 10, 15, 20 years to save that money to do it. So it's an interim solution. I think it's important we think about it, but I don't think there's only one way to do it, and I think the debate needs to be had into what's the most effective way. I mean, the one thing that comes to mind for me is CFCs back in the late 80s. We just banned it, and it solved the ozone problem at the time. I'm not saying that we ban heating, but there are other ways to do it, I think, that we can affect change, and I think we should need to look at those long and hard.
It gives us an opportunity to contribute to the environment. We have to think of our children and grandchildren in the future. We may have to make some sacrifices.
The carbon tax it's not good for Canada. There are other things that we can do to work with other countries, and my personal opinion is that that's something that the leaders of all the countries need to figure out and come together to address that, because it is a global issue.
It's going to cost us more to produce beef for simple fact of fuel costs, and everything's going to be affected, so everything's going to go up in price. So I think we're just, and we have no way of passing it on the consumer. It's pretty tough for us, and we grow hay and pasture land. Like, we're not making carbon like the big cities are, and in our cattle and in our small town, we have a plant that makes activated carbon out of recycled wood. So we really are negative on the carbon footprint as it is, like in our area anyhow.
I think we're just taxing businesses and agriculture in general down the tube. It's a struggle.
Well, it affects us a lot because as farmers, to show cattle, we have our barns and our shops, and just paying for that extra taxes just to heat it and keep our tractors and our cows fed in winter, that it costs a lot more, and I think it affects everyone. And then as we producers, we have to try and charge more for the stuff that we make, and that's going to affect everyone.
The huge cost in heating and fuel bills is really impacting our bottom line. The huge thing is margins right now are tight. We've had some very dry years, some very tough years. And to be honest with you, it shrinks things down to the point where I don't know if we can continue to operate the way we're operating and going forward. So it's really concerning on our end on how this is being handled, especially with the carbon tax. Our concern is that, especially as livestock producers and farmers, we sequester a lot of carbon with our land base, and we're really not getting the credit for that sequestration, and we're getting taxed for any emissions that we make.
What percentage of Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture?
Agriculture. I'd say 40%.
20%?
I'm not exactly sure on the number. I believe it's higher than most people expect. I'm gonna go with a safe, maybe risky 40%.
I'd say 15 to 20%.
70?
Oh goodness, 13?
You are so close. It's 10.
Oh wow, great.
Very good.
Okay, thanks, have a good day.
10% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are from livestock and crop production. But agriculture also helps to suck up and store CO2. In Canada, the oil and gas sector and the transportation sector make up nearly 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture is 6th on the list. Under the federal carbon pricing system, the Government of Canada is charging fuel producers and distributors $20 per ton of CO2 in 2019. That means natural gas retailers will be taxed about 4 cents per cubic meter. Gasoline will be taxed about 5 cents per liter. The carbon levy begins in April 2019. A fuel charge is just one piece of the federal carbon pricing plan. The other is a system for large-scale industry called output-based pricing. It set a limit on pollution and gives credit for lower emissions that can be traded or sold. That system begins in January 2019. What questions do you have about carbon pricing?
I'd like to know a lot more other than it's just a tax and it's going to cost you more, because now that the federal government has said we're going to go directly to the people, I think that's a good move, because people will see that it's going to be revenue neutral. If anything, people in Saskatchewan will probably get more money back than what they're going to end up paying. It may be an upfront cost, and I think that's really annoying the provincial government a lot, that people are going to probably get an idea that it's not going to cost them a whole lot. I think it's more about the egocentricity of the provincial government wanting to look like that they're paying for everything when that money usually comes through the federal government without very much fanfare.
I don't see how, this new idea of giving a rebate, like what's the point then? You take money one way and give it back the other way.
Where's the money coming from? Where's the money going? And is it transparent? Is the big thing, I think. Are they hiding money in places, or are they transparent about it? And is the information readily accessible for us to know what they're doing?
Where the money goes for this tax.
Well, I hope there'll be discounts on people who are using energy efficient cars.
Honestly, I wish I would know less. I got my own life to worry about right now. But, we got to worry about our children, right?
All I hear is the word carbon tax, but I've never had anyone really explain it to me that well. I just know that it's the government asking for more money about something, which I'm not totally for, but if it helps the planet, I guess.
When it comes to carbon pricing, Canadians have many questions about it, and here to help us make sense to some of them is Liberal MP for Central Nova and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment, Sean Fraser. Sean, hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
Great, thanks for having us today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, let's get right to it. We have some questions from Canadians about carbon pricing.
And I really don't know where that money goes to, and what is that money used for?
Whether this is just a government tax grab like everything else.
I think these are great questions. You want to follow the money if you're being a responsible consumer of politics. So to make absolutely clear, the government does not anticipate any new revenue for the government from this plan. 90% of the revenue collected from putting a price on pollution is going directly back to Canadian citizens in the province where the pollution is generated. Canadians living in jurisdictions where the system applies, the federal system applies, will actually get a check at tax time that's greater than the increased cost of living. So they'll be better off. The remaining 10% is going to go into a fund that allows municipalities, universities, schools, small businesses to actually become more efficient as well.
Will it help the environment?
I would ask a question as to how it affects us and how it affects the environment.
We've got estimates that putting a price on pollution is actually going to see a reduction in emissions that's equivalent to taking 30 coal-fired power plants offline. That's, put another way, the equivalent of 23 to 26 million cars off the road. So yes, it's going to help the environment. We know this because we've looked at data from other jurisdictions that have implemented this. We've seen reductions in the EU. We've seen plans implemented in BC and Alberta. Australia had a similar system in place for a period of time that saw emissions go down, and when they ended it, emissions started going back up. So this is the most efficient and effective thing we can do to reduce emissions that are going into our atmosphere today.
Next question.
How do they base what they return to the low income? Okay. That's my question, because I'm actually receiving it in Alberta. Okay. I lost my job in 2016, so and I receive $112 every 3 months. So I'm just wondering how they base their refund to the low income earners.
This is really important. When we were designing the plan, we wanted to make sure that families, low-income families and middle-class families in particular, were not having to front the cost of any increase to the cost of living. That's why we're actually showing it this first tax year coming up. You're going to see a difference on your notice of assessment, for example, in terms of how much this levy is going to come back to you. We don't want to put families in the position where they have to bear any kind of an increased cost without having that money up front. If you live in a province like New Brunswick or Ontario, the rebate that you're going to receive is in the ballpark of $250 a year. If you live in Saskatchewan, where there's a lot more big polluters that are going to have to pay into this fund, your rebate is going to be in excess of $600 in the first year. And each year over the next 5 years, that amount's going to go up. So this is actually going to leave low-income and middle-income families better off at the end of each year.
Sean, I want to thank you for helping us clear some stuff up about that. So Appreciate your help.
That's right, and I want to thank everybody who had these questions. I think we'll all be better off if people engage in the way that these individuals have. So thank you very much for covering it.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Which Canadian province was the first to implement a carbon tax?
BC.
Ontario?
I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't know.
Quebec.
I can give you three choices.
Yes, yeah.
British Columbia, New Brunswick, or Saskatchewan?
British Columbia.
British Columbia.
Absolutely correct.
Okay.
You're doing well today.
Yeah, thank you.
Back in 2008, the province of British Columbia implemented the first broad-based carbon tax in North America. 10 years later, it meets the national benchmark set by the federal government. The government has also funded the province with $1.5 million to support carbon capture technology, $160 million to support energy efficiency in homes and businesses, composting and tree planting, $3.1 billion for public transit projects, and $1.1 billion for green infrastructure projects. Canada's goal is to reduce emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by the year 2030. Are provinces or the federal government best equipped to make climate policy?
I think both have a role to play. I think they work in combination. If only one part is doing it, you're always going to have resistance from the other side. I think it's a joint effort of all Canadians actually to understand how real climate change is and to actually follow and come through with these policies and be more strict about them if needed. I think it's everyone's job.
Canada, that's for sure, because we're like a country, so every country in the world should have their own thing to prevent the temperature and everything.
I think that citizens should get involved with it too, not just governments telling us what to do, because then it's more it is our lives that are being affected by it. So I think that if we're able to have a say in what's being done to change it, then I think that would be good, and then just everyone can get involved in it.
We're using stuff at a city level as well. I don't know if the municipal government's also involved in those. So we pay taxes federally, provincially, and municipally. So in terms of climate change, I think for instance, public transit, we need to make sure we have a good system, and that would decrease our emissions in Edmonton.
In general, we get, especially with Kyoto, we got a lot of goodwill promises, but with no enforcement, it got 30% worse. So I feel like it needs to be forced, otherwise nobody does anything about it.
It's got to be a partnership, right? It starts from the city level all the way up to provincial, federal, and then all the nations working together towards a common cause. I think if we're not all working together, we're not going to be able to make the impact that we need.
It's technically should be a provincial tax, so they should have control of that. But looking at how it will affect me as a farmer, we do not have control of our pricing. And in Canada, we actually have the second highest input costs in the world, second next only to Japan. So it costs me a lot of money to grow my crop, and I don't get to control my end pricing. Hi, I'm Megz. I'm a grain farmer in southwest Saskatchewan. I have been farming for 6 years now, and this spring we seeded 2,100 acres. So we grew barley, durum wheat, which is used for making pasta, large green lentils, and some flax as well. The farm actually has been in my husband's family for 107 years. So he's 4th generation, and our 2 little girls are 5th generation farmers.
Say barley, Rini.
There is so much kind of unknown. I was running off of some numbers that talked about a cost per acre if a forced carbon tax was put onto my operation, which would be running at $50 a ton. And for seeding 2,100 acres, I was looking at about $30,000 a year. And quite frankly, that's a really, really hard bill to make my farm swallow, especially the last 3 years. Commodity pricing has been low. We've been in drought for 2 years.
We had snow in October. There's guys still trying to get their fields combined because it was just such a disaster.
We just don't have the resources to suddenly come up with that kind of capital. So when my costs keep going up, like they would with a carbon tax, I don't get to try to recoup that cost on the other end, and it makes it extremely hard for me to be a farmer. It's been going on in different provinces now for a slower rollout, and Saskatchewan's always taken a firm line against it. And so I think for maybe the first year, I kind of thought, you know, this doesn't affect me, my province is against it. A lot of farmers are upset. It feels like we've been left out of the conversation. You know, they want to point a bad finger and shake it at us and say, whoa, you're producing carbon, it's bad, but we actually need carbon for farming. And I'm a no-till farmer in Saskatchewan, and our agricultural practices with that no-till are actually net zero for carbon emissions. And Canadian cropland last year sequestered 11 million tons of carbon. The other challenge with the carbon pricing coming into Canada and being forced on farmers in agriculture is that Canada does not have the population to be able to consume the goods and the products that are created in Canada or grown in Canada. And when we're competing against a market that doesn't have a carbon tax, we're taking a hit to be able to stay competitive on that market, and that hit is passed on to myself as a farmer. Agriculture is already making huge strides towards being more sustainable. Basically, we just want everything spread on the field. It's going to break down and be nutrients for next year. We soil sample now, so we're only putting exactly down what our soil needs. We're not overusing chemicals or fertilizers. That soil is our greatest resource, and we're going to take care of that the best of our ability. I'd actually like to see more forward thinking from the government on green energy, if that's a way that they want to move forward. I was recently in Germany, and there's incentives for farmers to have solar on their farms and for farmers to have wind and other things because the government wants to move forward with green energy, and they're making that a priority instead of simply taxing it and hoping everything else kind of falls into place on its own.
How should Canada reduce its carbon footprint?
Help people to get off of fossil fuels. Give incentives to people to buy electric cars.
A lot of the greenhouse emissions come from meat and meat consumption, so I think if everybody had a meatless Monday or two once in a while, we'd have a lot less greenhouse gases.
Well, I think we could do a lot more with solar and wind, alternative energies. We just covered our barn roof with solar panels, and that's partly because we're interested in reducing our bills, but also because it will reduce the carbon footprint. So I think that it's very important that the government support this, you know, that there are incentives in place so that people, you know, that it's attractive economically for people to do that kind of thing, and that would make a big difference.
So I would say it would be for all of us to have a sense of community, and, you know, carpool and use public transit, use public transit, less cars and stuff like that.
Muskrat Falls, you know, there's more hydroelectric. We're working towards electric vehicles slowly, and, you know, it'll take hold.
Electric cars, I would have to say. It's the first thing that comes to mind.
PEI is like, what, 0.2% or something like that of the... No matter what we do here in PEI, we're not going to make a big difference, but we got to do our part too. Our 0.2 needs to be reduced a little, and everybody else is the same. Make a difference. And planting trees, walking gentle on the earth. Try to leave things a little better than you found them.
On behalf of my colleagues at the Cable Public Affairs Channel, thanks for watching this week's episode of Outburst. I'm Glenn McGuinness. Next week, we'll be exploring Canada's role in the world, and we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at outburst@cpac.ca. You can also find us on social media. It's your turn to speak up, and we're listening.